we begin tonight's show, we're facing a stunning escalation in the legal war against Israel. The International Criminal Court, has issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant, accusing them of war crimes for Israel's response to the October 7th Hamas massacre. This is the first time the ICC has targeted the leaders of a democratic ally, despite Israel not even being a member of the court. And make no mistake, this is not justice. This is lawfare, using the law as a weapon to attack democracies while shielding terrorists. The implications are global. If the ICC can come after Israeli leaders, what's to stop them from targeting US officials next? At the same time, BDS is gaining steam in America, with universities and city councils pushing boycotts while ignoring Hamas atrocities. At the UN, anti-Israel resolutions rewrite history and strip the Jewish people of their connection to Jerusalem. But there's pushback. The House passed the ICC legislation, and the Senate is working on the same. Senator Ted Cruz has just introduced the Libel Act legislation to strip immunity from UN officials who promote anti-Semitic lawfare and hold them accountable. This fight is about more than politics. It's about truth, justice, and defending the right of sovereign nations to protect their citizens. To help us unpack all of this, I'm joined tonight by Eugene Kontorovich, one of the most important legal minds defending Israel on the world stage. He's Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Senior Scholar at the Kohelet Policy Forum, and a professor at George Mason University Scalia Law School. He's a leading force in exposing the hypocrisy of international institutions. Few people understand this legal battlefield better, and few are fighting harder for Israel's legitimacy in the courtroom and beyond. I'm so thrilled to have you on the show, Eugene. Welcome to Nothing But the Truth, Eugene Kontorovich.
Thank you. Great to be here, Trudy.
So happy to have you. I am told that you are really one of the few people that voice is so respected across the world, and I mean the world, with regard to all of these issues, and that you are very brilliant. So we're so happy to have you here at Nothing But the Truth to help us all understand these unbelievably complex issues. So to begin with, Eugene, there are two international courts that exist: the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, which prosecutes individuals, and the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, which handles disputes between states. But most people don't even know that they're two separate bodies. A lot of people don't even know that they exist. Can you walk us through what each of these courts does, when and why they were created? I know this is a lot in one question. Which countries are parties to them, and explain how both are now being used as legal weapons in the effort to delegitimize Israel.
Okay, well, that's the rest of our conversation today. But I'll say briefly, first of all, there are more than two international courts in the world. There's actually a large number of international courts. There's the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in Hamburg. There's the European Court of Human Rights and the European Court of Justice in Strasbourg. So there are a bunch of international courts, actually, with different functions and different jurisdictions. The two of the most prominent and two of the most problematic are the ones you mentioned, and they're also often confused because they both sit in The Hague, but they are in fact different courts. So let's start with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which came first. So the ICJ is part of the United Nations. It is the judicial organ of the United Nations, and was created at the same time as the United Nations. And it was supposed to be the original vision. There was a whole different vision for the United Nations. There was this view that the United Nations would have this kind of army at its disposal, that it would send around the world to keep trouble from breaking out. That never happened. And the peacekeepers are like a distant shadow of that. And that they would have this court. And whenever countries had disagreements, instead of going to war, they'd say, see you in court. But the way this court works is it only has jurisdiction over countries that agree to be part of it. And that's the way all international tribunals really work, because in international law, no one can bind a country against its will. So countries have to agree. And the original vision was that countries would just sign a blanket agreement saying, we agree to have all of our issues taken to the ICJ. A few countries have that, but most countries either did not do that or have over time stopped doing that.
What do you by stop doing or starting doing? Meaning signing up to be under the jurisdiction of the
Yes.
ICJ.
Exactly. And so the United States had something like that. And then, as a result of a series of what the US saw as biased and lawless rulings, it basically stopped agreeing to have cases taken to the ICJ. Most and more countries have stopped agreeing. Very few have this general agreement. So now, when the ICJ hears cases, it's because countries are part of a treaty, and that particular treaty says that disputes are going to be decided by the ICJ. Now, and there are not many such important treaties that really, so that doesn't happen much. So generally, the ICJ's jurisdiction is going down, 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 down over time. Um, I can tell you that compliance with its measures, there was an article in the European Journal of International Law which said that compliance with the ICJ's injunctions, or their version of injunctions, is at about 50%. And in things involving armed conflict or sovereignty issues, close to zero. The it is not a world court in the sense people might imagine. It hands down verdicts, and those verdicts are obeyed. The United States, in particular, tries to involve being entangled with the ICJ whenever possible. A thing that really started in the 1980s when they issued a very mistaken decision in a case called Nicaragua versus the United States, basically saying that the United States could not really help the Contras against the Nicaragua communist government. So Israel is a member of a treaty called the Genocide Convention. And that treaty provides that disputes about the Genocide Convention, which was created in the 1950s after World War II to prevent another Holocaust. And it says that disputes under the Genocide Convention will be taken to this court, will be decided by the ICJ. So
has there ever been any issues other than the Holocaust and today being brought before the ICJ?
Even under the Genocide Convention?
Yes.
There have been a couple cases because countries often accuse each other of genocide in wartime. So there's a case involving Serbia and Croatia, a case involving Myanmar, but very few. But what's interesting here is no one is accusing Israel of genocide against South Africa. Right? South Africa is not, this is not a dispute between Israel and South Africa. But because only countries can start a case in the ICJ, so normally that would mean the Palestinians can't bring a case. So South Africa created this dispute, even though under American notions of law, there is no dispute between Israel and South Africa. There's no case. It's a purely political proceeding. Now, I don't think the ICJ should have said that they upheld their jurisdiction, because the point of this is to deal with actual disputes between countries, not political disputes.
Wait a minute. So that's a very interesting point. So South Africa brought this whole issue up. They have no standing. Correct?
Exactly. Your Honor, I was waiting for you to say it. I
Or,
know I'm in the presence of a jurist, of a judge. So
yes, so they have no standing to bring this, yet they did bring this issue, and this issue had a lot of publicity. It gained a lot of publicity.
and it's important to say ICJ proceedings go on for years, often decades. So the court's ruling on this case is unlikely to happen anytime soon, and I'm very convinced that it's not going to happen in the next 4 years, because they're clever. But at the same time, with things like this, the process is the punishment, right? So they created a huge number of headlines. There's a case against Israel, genocide. Now, the court has not said Israel is committing genocide. What they have said is if everything South Africa says is true, which it's not, then maybe there is an issue under the Genocide Convention. Now, as lawyers, we know that that is not any kind of evidentiary finding. That's the way courts talk about things, right? Because they have, but as a result, the BDS activists, anti-Israel activists are now going around using this very misleading talking point that the ICJ has said it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide. They've said no such thing as a factual matter. Right? They've made no factual findings whatsoever, and but at the same time, it creates this negative diplomatic aura around Israel.
So that's the ICJ. Now let's move on to the ICC, which seems to be.
And let me just add about the ICJ. It hears cases only involving countries, and its decisions are addressed to countries and given orders to countries. Those orders are not backed by any particular force, and so they're not greatly complied with, shall we say. Let me put it this way: people only really know about the ICJ. This is often the case when Israel is involved. But there's an ICJ decision saying that Britain has to give up some islands that it controls. Britain has not done that for many years. No one's saying Britain is like an international rogue state. America has disregarded several ICJ decisions, both in regards to Nicaragua and Iran. No one's saying America is a rogue state. Okay, the ICC is a new thing. It started new in the historic sense. It started a little over 20 years ago. And it was born in this wave of post-Cold War optimism, right? There was this brief period, the 1990s, when people thought that there was going to be a whole new world without great power competition, and what is going to run the world now is going to be rules, international law. And so the ICC is a separate body, not related to the United Nations. And its goal originally was to prosecute, to be a forum to prosecute offenders of the worst kinds of crimes, war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. And this was in the background of the Rwandan genocide and the Bosnian civil war, the Serbian, pardon, or whatever, the Yugoslav civil war, the multi-way conflict there, and as a result, there were separate tribunals set up to deal with that, UN tribunals. But let's have a permanent court that can deal with these things whenever they arise. It only has, and it was created by a special treaty. Again, it only has jurisdiction over countries that joined. The United States never joined. Israel never joined. By the way, the United States was smart enough not to even agree to the provisions of the Genocide Convention giving the ICJ jurisdiction. So you can't bring that kind of case against America, but Israel was naive and thought, what problem could we have under the Genocide Convention? But back to the ICC. America and Israel never signed. Indeed, there's a inverse relationship between a country's propensity to engage in or be involved in military activity and its signing the ICC. So most of the world's military powers or countries likely to be in armed conflict, India, Pakistan, China, are not members of the ICC. Most of the world's population lives in non-ICC countries. At the same time, they did get something like 100 countries to join. These are mostly European countries who are, unlikely to be involved in things related to the ICC. And
like which countries? France, Europe, France, Italy.
Every single one, every single European. As a matter of fact, the European Union basically has a foreign policy program. They want everyone to join the ICC. So they tie their foreign aid to ICC membership, which is why African countries have joined. As a matter of fact, just as a result of what we're about to talk about, the first European country quit the ICC, which is a historic thing, which is Hungary, announced that it's going to be quitting the ICC. The Europeans had a position that the ICC was almost part of what it means to be part of Europe.
Okay.
And again, for them, it's more, I would call it, might use this word again, it's more a symbolic or religious activity because, Malta or Italy is not likely to find itself in armed conflict. and certainly not likely to be engaged in mass atrocities, but they believe in this vision. The problem is the ICC has no police and it has no enforcement mechanism. So, how are you going to prosecute leaders of countries for genocide, let's say? First of all, the bad guys probably are not going to join your treaty. And if they are, they're not going to care about your process. So, as a result, the ICC has really failed to bring the real perpetrators of mass atrocities to justice. Um, they have tried to go after several sitting heads of state, but they always fail because there's no compliance mechanism. Indeed, they had indicted the current president of Kenya was indicted by the ICC. So was the past president, and both those cases fell apart when the witnesses changed their testimony at the last minute or became mysteriously unlocatable.
Okay, that sounds like a movie, like a real
But
real.
so the world is like the movie, but the ICC they have their heads in the clouds. So and also countries that they have whose leaders they have prosecuted have also decided to quit the ICC, and that's the brilliant thing about. So let's say they indicted Vladimir Putin. That's very nice. It took them a long time to do so, but they're never going to get Putin. They're never going to get Putin. Who's going to hand over Putin? The only way Putin would be handed over is if Russia loses anyway, if he falls from power. So that's why I think one of the reasons, many reasons, they're going after Israel.
But if they handed over Putin, or somebody handed over Putin, who are they handing him to, and what is the ramifications? Is there a jail in?
Oh, yeah. So it is a freestanding criminal court. It's a criminal court not attached to anything. It happens to be in The Hague. There is, in fact, a jail in The Hague. It is not very full because so far, for all the mass atrocities in the world, they have convicted 6 people on final conviction after appeal of the mass atrocity crimes. So they have a very spacious
Facility?
facility in The Hague, full of not full of minor African warlords. But the point is this: what would be imagine the circumstance in which Putin would be handed over to the ICC? There's only one circumstance in which that would happen.
Okay, what is it?
He falls from power. He's removed forcibly from power. Right?
Right.
In that case, winding up on trial at the ICC is the least of the bad things that could happen to him.
Right. Right.
And so look, the ICC indicted Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi would have dreamed of being, apprehended and sent to the ICC rather than torn piece by piece. And so that gets to, part of this ridiculous case that they have involving Israel, which is not a member, and so they have no jurisdiction. But that's the attraction for them. Israel can't quit. Right? So all their cases up to now, most of their cases had involved African countries. And then because that's where the crimes are, and the African countries said, enough. Any more prosecutions of African leaders, all 30 African countries are going to quit. Israel can't quit because it never joined. So it's a complete perversion. And of course, the effect, it's important to say what the effect is of such prosecutions. Look, Hamas is very much in the situation of Putin. Hamas is not afraid of the ICC, right? Because when you invade a neighboring country, massacre thousands of people, rape, kidnap, launch rockets, you understand that there's a good chance that you're going to meet a violent death. Right? So they accept that. That's one thing when you become a Sinwar, you know that you're likely to wind up prematurely dead. Now, so think about your decision tree, right? You attack Israel, one of two things can happen. Either you're going to succeed and stay in power because you're going to get a hostage deal because the foreign international pressure is going to make Israel stop, and then you stay in power, and that's it. ICC is never going to get you. Okay, you can't leave Gaza, but you're gonna be a hero to your people. You're gonna be an Arab legend. You're gonna go down in Muslim history. Is how they see it. On the other hand, maybe you won't succeed. In which case, you may likely die. Or and now they've introduced a new option. Maybe you'll be handed over to the ICC. That's actually improving their outcome in this state of the world where they don't win. So, and indeed, all three of the people who the ICC indicted have been killed by Israel long before the ICC could get. As a matter of fact, we can now say that Israel has brought to justice more people wanted by the ICC than the ICC has done in a decade. Uh, Israel's done that in a year. But then, what they have really done is they have, the essence of the charge at the ICC is starvation. So again, the ICC has no jurisdiction because Israel never joined. So how do they pretend to exercise jurisdiction? They pretend that there's a country called Palestine, and they pretend that that country accepted jurisdiction, and they pretend that Gaza is part of that country. So they created a fake country. Then they created a fake crime, starvation. There, in fact, does not appear to be starvation in Gaza. And when when the ICC at least issued their warrants, there had been some reports from UN agencies saying we're worried there may be starvation in Gaza. 2 months after a month after, I think the ICC warrants came out, the official UN hunger agency came out with a report that said, you know what, all the things we said before are wrong. We had bad methodology, unreliable information. There is not starvation in Gaza. But even if there were starvation of Gaza, Israel cannot be blamed for it because Israel does not control food distribution in Gaza. Right? Starvation is not a result, around the world. Starvation is not a result of lack of food. It's a lack of it's political interference in distribution. Um, so enough calories gets into Gaza to feed everyone. What happens after is Hamas's business. So they created a fake country, invented a fake crime. It's even worse than a traditional anti-Semitic blood libel. Because in the traditional anti-Semitic blood libel of the Middle Ages, when they would say that Jews were using Christian babies' blood for matzah, there would often be an actual dead baby. Right? There would be a child who would be killed by either unknown parties or someone who was going to be protected, and they would blame the death of this child or this missing child on the Jews. But here, there's not even anyone who has starved. So, in a sense, it's worse. So that is the baseless case at the ICC.
But yet they did issue arrest warrants.
Correct.
And what is the effect of those arrest warrants? Why should that have any basis in any sort of issue that we should be concerned about?
The effect is twofold. First of all, there's a diplomatic effect, right? And again, it creates a talking point. The talking point is the Prime Minister of Israel is wanted by the ICC. Again, the President of Kenya was wanted by the ICC until the witnesses disappeared. But and that doesn't seem to harm Kenya. But Israel is particularly vulnerable, and so it's to create that talking point and to create a kind of base for agitation against Israel. On a second level, it's it, countries that join the ICC are supposed to arrest anyone wanted by the ICC. Now, since Bibi has actually managed to travel to ICC member states and not get arrested, but there's certainly some to which he probably could not travel. There was a horrible business when he was not able to go to a Holocaust memorial in Poland because Poland said that they would arrest him for essentially trying to prevent a Holocaust. But so there is an impact, and I'd say the biggest impact is a different thing. It's deterrence, right? So let's say that you're some Israeli general, and you're thinking, should you be fighting Hamas vigorously to the full extent allowed by international law, even though it will make you a target of this kind of lawfare? And you're thinking, why should I have to shoulder the entire burden of whatever, not being able to travel after I retire for this thing that benefits the whole country? Right? And this is why when democracies are targeted by the ICC, they have very different incentives, and it's very easy to deter democracies because the people who are acting on behalf of the public are not reaping great private benefits through their actions, unlike Sinwar. So in a sense, by in a sort of even-handed treatment of Hamas in Israel, they are deterring self-defense by democracies and encouraging terror regimes.
So just bring it home to the United States for a moment. The United States is a
It's
democracy.
coming. It's coming home.
Right. It's coming home. So the United States is such a democracy like Israel. And how does it impact the United States and officials here in the United States and soldiers in the United States Army?
So the ICC has already made clear that it believes it can prosecute, investigate, issue arrest warrants for American soldiers and American officials. In fact, they actually had an investigation into alleged crimes by US soldiers in Afghanistan, and they only dropped that investigation after President Trump, in his first term, imposed sanctions on them. And then these brave defenders of international law, they dropped the American part of that case. But they clearly believe they can arrest American officials, and indeed, the current prosecutor has talked about now indicting American senators for their legislative attempts to deal with the ICC. So I think it is 100% certain. Again, it's impossible to go after a sitting official. The ICC, is afraid that Trump is going to shut them down with sanctions, which I think is the right thing to do. But they're going to try to ride out the next 4 years. They're going to keep their head down and ride it out. But they don't have a statute of limitations for these things. And of course, under a Democratic administration, I think it's nearly guaranteed that senior Trump officials, maybe U.S. senators, will face charges before the ICC. First of all, for messing with the ICC, which they call, interference with justice, and from anything, the Trump Gaza plan, they're going to accuse of war crimes, and a Democratic president is not going to support that prosecution. You know what he's going to do?
What?
He's going to say, "I oppose this. It's a very bad thing, but what can I do?"
Right. So,
And when a European country would arrest one of these Americans, he would not go to war over it.
so there
So
is
that's why it's crucial that President Trump eliminate the threat posed to him by the ICC during his term.
So there is legislation in the Senate currently that is not on the floor because it hasn't been agreed to come onto the floor. They haven't come to actually that piece of
Because
legislation.
Schumer Israel has blocked it, basically.
Well, he's blocked it. It did pass the House, this legislation. And let's hopefully see what will happen in the Senate, and hopefully something will come to the floor and be voted. It was pretty bipartisan in the House.
Yeah, I want to make clear that such legislation is not strictly necessary. Pretty much everything that the legislation does can be done by executive order. Now, of course, executive orders can be repealed by the next president, but I think 4 years of presidential sanctions on the ICC could effectively shut the institution down.
So you have now given us a tremendous flavor of the ICC and the ICJ, and I think it's information that many of us did not know, did not really understand. So thank you so much for that. But
I know,
yes, go.
I know we were going to move on to some Israeli domestic topics, but we also wanted, I think, to talk about the Libel Act. So maybe
Yes, this is what I would like to do before we conclude part one of our incredible two-part series with Eugene Kontorovich, world legal expert. I would like to just discuss the Libel Act for just a moment. If you can explain that, tell us what that is, and why this is important.
Okay, so currently under international law, countries have sovereign immunity. That means if a country even commits serious crimes, you cannot sue it in court. Basically, countries agree amongst themselves that they're not going to allow lawsuits against each other to not create diplomatic problems. In America, there's a big exception to that people might have heard of, which is for the terrorism support exception. So a country, like let's say Iran, that supports terror, American victims of those attacks can sue the country, notwithstanding sovereign immunity, in U.S. courts and recover. And this is in fact how, American victims have gotten $18 billion in damages against Iran, North Korea, Libya, the Palestinian Authority. And this is a big deal that you can sue a country.
But how does one collect on that? Just from my own perspective as a personal injury lawyer.
It's a good question. Collections are difficult, but some of these countries, in particular Iran, had at one point some assets in the United States that you could seize.
Okay.
But collection is not easy. But basically, assets in the United States, bank accounts, things like this.
Okay.
Property. So the idea is even a country which in international law has the broadest immunity imaginable should not be able to support murder, torture, etc., and not pay for it. On the other hand, if you're an international organization, what is an international organization? Any organization created by treaty. The UN is one example, but also we mentioned the ICC and all the UN related organizations, World Health Organization, UNESCO, International Committee for the Red Cross, European Union, whatever. There's many, many international organizations. Those organizations in the United States also have immunity that's modeled on sovereign immunity, to let them do their job without getting sued, let's say. And this came from a law that was passed in 1945 called the International Organizations Immunity Act, that said these organizations can enjoy immunity comparable to that immunity enjoyed by countries. Okay, but it turns out, due to a complete accident, a congressional oversight, that international organizations actually have immunity even if they commit terrorism. So we have an absurd result where international organizations, like a UN organization, can murder, torture, and not be able to be sued for it by the victims, not be able to pay damages, which is weird. How is an international organization created? By a treaty. Countries create the international organizations. So we have the absurd result where the international organization has more immunity than the countries that create it. It has more immunity than the president. Has more immunity if a police department has some rogue agents who torture, murder citizens. They can be sued. Right? The municipality can be sued, and the victims can recover. But if it's done by, let's say, a United Nations agency, no justice whatsoever. And that is just an oversight, because, of course, in 1945, when Congress wrote this law, they did not imagine that agencies of the United Nations would invade sovereign countries, shoot up entire cities, rape, torture, and take hostages, which is exactly what at least a dozen workers of the United Nations Relief Works Agency did on October 7th, or provide basically accommodation, lodging, and support services, logistical services, for a designated foreign terror organization, which is exactly what UNRWA has done. UNRWA is the most sort of visible example. So what the Liable Act would do is fix this gap, fix this lacuna, and say, just like you can sue Iran for supporting Hamas, and just like victims are now suing Iran, they're suing the Associated Press. Why? Because they had a photographer who was a Hamas guy. Um, so UNRWA had a bunch of people, has a bunch of, maybe the whole organization is deeply embedded with Hamas. So this would allow you to sue those organizations and American victims to recover damages. And that would, A, hold these organizations accountable. Why should they be able to do this and get away with it? B, provide justice for victims, and C, it would maybe discourage Hamas from using these organizations. Because why does Hamas hijack organizations like UNRWA? Why do they piggyback on organizations like the ICRC? Because they have immunity. So when you have immunity, you don't have to worry. If you don't, as you say, a personal injury attorney, we know the purpose of tort liability, being able to be sued, is so that you internalize the costs of your actions, so that you act with care. These organizations have not acted with care.
I see. And the Libel Act was introduced by Senator Ted Cruz,
Correct.
and hopefully this will fix that glitch
Yeah.
and will be very effective. I think I told you I'm one of the presidents of NORPAC, and this year I am the chair of NORPAC's annual mission to Washington. As many of my listeners know, NORPAC is one of the largest political action committees in the country, supporting a very strong U.S.-Israel alliance. This May 20th, over 1,000 pro-Israel citizens are going to come on that NORPAC mission and go to Washington, D.C. to meet with hundreds of members of the House and the Senate on key issues affecting Jewish and pro-Israel Americans, including a lot of the issues that we cover on this show each week. And most importantly, maybe the issues that we've covered today regarding the ICC and the Libel Act. So I strongly encourage anyone who wants to join us, sign up and attend the mission on May 20th. You can go to norpac.net to sign up, and you could be intimately involved in protecting Israel from these gross and horrible miscarriages of justice.
I want to add one thing about the Libel Act. Like with the ICC, look, it's very hard to get legislation passed in Congress now. Congress is pretty dysfunctional. But these are all issues where the president can act alone. That is to say, under the International Organizations Immunity Act, the president himself, by executive order, can remove the immunities of particular international organizations. And I think it's important to stress that if Congress is not going to allow for sanctions on the ICC when they target non-member democracies, if Congress is not going to allow American victims of terror to sue international organizations that engage in murder and the material support for terrorism, then the president should promptly do the same.
Great point. Actually, really great point. Sadly, this brings us to the end of part one of our conversation with Eugene Kontorovich. Eugene, you have really broken down some very complex issues for us, for me and for us listening. And I can't thank you enough. I feel very much infused with a lot of information so that I can actually go forward and not only understand these issues, but be an ambassador for Israel with regard to these issues. So I want to thank you so much for joining us and helping us unpack the critical legal and geopolitical developments regarding the ICC, the ICJ, and the UN. But stay tuned, because we are going to have part two with expert Eugene Kontorovich, where he will be breaking down the very complex and highly debated issue of judicial reform in Israel. You definitely do not want to miss that. And that will be next week, and that is part two. Thank you again, Eugene, for this week. Can't wait to discuss judicial reform with you in the next episode. As always, you can catch Nothing But the Truth every Thursday at 9:30 p.m. on the radio. And if you missed any part of this episode or want to revisit any of our past shows, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining. This has been Nothing But the Truth with Trudy Stern. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.